Welcome, everybody. This is one of my favorite spots on campus, just a beautiful, beautiful room, so it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm Henry Brady, Dean of the Goldman School of Public Policy and a professor of political science. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight to introduce Jennifer Granholm, former two-term governor of Michigan, and most importantly, a UC Berkeley graduate. Yes. Now, how did she get here? Well, she was born in Canada, but grew up in the Bay Area, so she knows the Bay Area very, very well. I found, by the way, when I first met her, I started pointing out places on campus, and all of a sudden I realized, no, she knows the campus. She's been here. I don't need to be my tour guide self. So it's a thrill to have somebody who knows her way around. She graduated from UC Berkeley in 1984 with a BA in political science and in French, and from Harvard Law School in 1987. She then went off to Michigan and launched her public service career as a clerk for Michigan's 6th Circuit, then became a federal prosecutor in Detroit, from which I'm sure she has some very interesting tales to tell. Must have been an interesting place. Not tonight, yeah, some other time. And then she went on to be elected Michigan's first female attorney general. In 2000, there's still some seats up here, yes. In 2003, she was elected governor. Of course, she faced some daunting challenges. Already it was clear that manufacturing was fleeing the Middle West, and then, of course, came along the Great Recession. So Michigan lost something like half of its manufacturing jobs that it had in the 1990s by the end of your term. And obviously that was because of factors that were almost entirely out of her control, given what was going on in manufacturing in the United States and what was going on with respect to the economy in general. She nevertheless tried very hard to deal with these problems by figuring out ways to change the nature of the Michigan economy, to focus on green jobs, to focus on fundamental economic change, to try to streamline the state budget. In fact, this sounds very reminiscent of what we're going through here in California right now. High unemployment rate, a state budget that had to be cut given the exigencies of tax revenues, and what do you do? And at the same time, trying to make sure in Michigan, a problem that luckily we don't have so acutely, we're trying to restructure the economy. So I'm very excited tonight to hear about the governor's strategy for job creation, about what we can do to become a 21st century economy. I think a lot of the debate right now is about macroeconomic issues, about should we be spending and have a fiscal stimulus, or should we be having monetary policy, or what should we be doing? And those are, of course, important macro policies. But I think ultimately the real question for America is, can we restructure our economy so we're competitive in the 21st century and we can attract jobs of the sort that we have to have? That's the more fundamental question, and I don't see a lot of discussion or debate about that exact problem. So it's thrilling to have somebody who's devoting themselves to this. She's writing a book about the topic right now, and who has, I think, lots to say about it. Let me just say a word about how we're going to go. Governor Granholm will first give a talk. Then we're going to open up the evening for question and answer. Please send question cards, which we'll be passing out. We're going to do questions from the question cards. I will sort through them, so write legibly, please, if you can. And then I'll sort through them and ask the governor those questions. So there'll be people handing them out and then picking them up in the aisles. So you can raise your hand, by the way, if you filled out a card, and somebody will get it from you. So without further ado, it's a distinct thrill, a great pleasure, quite wonderful to have Jennifer Granholm here. She's not only a distinguished public servant, but also, most importantly right now, a new visiting faculty member at the Goldman School of Public Policy. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, testing. Oh, it is. It's working. Thank you so much, Dean Brady. And thank you all for coming out this evening. It is a very cool thing for me to be back. Everybody's been so nice, and that's not something that a politician gets to say very often. So I'm really glad to be among friends and good to be home. Glad to have brought my better half with me, Dan Mulhern, who's up here, who will also be teaching and who has lived with me through the crisis of Michigan now for the past 8 years, 12 if you count the attorney, when I was Attorney General, but of course as Attorney General I didn't have any responsibility for the economy. So I'm really happy to be back, and I'm happy to be back on this campus. I'm just wondering, were any of you on this campus in the early 80s? If you raise your hand if you were on this campus in the early 80s. I just have to check something. So as I keep telling Dan, the thing I miss is like the craziness on Sproul Plaza. That's still crazy, right? Is there still characters and everything? Like, is the Pickle Man still there? Or the Polka Dot Man? Yeah. Polka Dot Man still there? What about the Hate Man? You know, the guy, he would sit in the urn and he would yell insults down at people? No? He came to Michigan. That's probably what it was. Anyway. So it's great to be back. But here's what I want to do, is I want to talk about something that has been very near and dear to my heart, but really near and dear to anybody who cares about whether America can actually create jobs in a global economy and keep them here. And so let me just start by saying that my experience really is as governor of Michigan. Michigan's been the state that's been the hardest hit, even though California's unemployment rate is high too. In terms of the hit to the main sector in our economy, Michigan was the hardest hit state in the nation for the entire decade. And so I'm going to start by talking about the problem. Of course, let me just say, this subheading there, a U.S. jobless recovery, everybody keeps saying, you know, record profits, great. We see huge amounts of, you know, activity in the stock market, record levels, but you're not seeing that with respect to jobs. We're still stuck at this very, very low level, and that is because we have seen a structural change in the nation's economy. It's not a cycle anymore. This is a structural change, and it's because globalization has provided opportunities for companies to go overseas. And in fact, in the U.S., just this past decade, 42,000 factories closed. Many of them didn't just shut down, but many of them went somewhere else. And this is just the way it is in a global economy. It's not that you can prevent factories from leaving when you have trade agreements, et cetera, that enable the owners of those factories to make a greater profit by paying less in expenses somewhere else. It is just the way things are. So the question is, in the face of that, what do we do? This is just a couple of stats to indicate that this is movement that we are seeing. In 2001, 32% of the top 500 U.S. companies' profits came from abroad. But by 2008, it was 48%. And I don't even have a more recent figure because it's not something that they put in their SEC filings. But we are seeing clearly opportunity grow outside of the U.S. and opportunity for jobs shrink inside the U.S. Just in a 2-year period, 2006 to 2008, these multinational companies, the hiring abroad rose by 729,000 in those 2 years, and the hiring dropped in the same firms in the U.S. by 500,000 jobs. So we are seeing this incredible movement, and Dean Brady, was talking about manufacturing. Between 2000 and 2009, the total American workers employed in auto manufacturing parts fell by 50%. In Michigan, a state of 10 million people, this past decade, we have lost 850,000 jobs. Can you imagine that? It's just a big number. But 850,000 jobs in a state of 10 million people when you're counting senior citizens, children, et cetera. It is like a nuclear bomb has gone off in the industrial Midwest and in manufacturing communities. So what I want to do, well, let me do this. I'm gonna start by telling you a story, and I'm hoping that y'all up there can help to find it. Did I press a button I shouldn't have? He's shaking his head, the man who knows the answers. But while they're fixing that, I want to tell you one story, just to sort of lay this conversation out. And it's the story of a community in Michigan called Greenville. And Greenville is a small town. Okay, back up. I'm going to see if this works to go to the next slide. All right. Oh, this is a great quote by Jack Welch. when he was chairman and CEO of GE. Ideally, you'd have every plant you own on a barge to move with currencies and changes in the economy. From the CEO's perspective, right? Because you'd want to keep moving it to the place where it's cheaper. Just keep moving it so that you can continue to get a large amount of profits. And again, this is just the way it is because the corporations have a responsibility to their shareholders and to make profit. So what do we do in the face of that? Let me just talk to you about Greenville for a moment. So Greenville is a little town of 8,000 people in the middle of Michigan. How many of you guys have been to Michigan before? Oh, I love it. So anybody been to Greenville? No. Okay. Greenville is a town of 8,000 people right in the middle. You know, Michigan is, we carry a map of Michigan on the end of our arms. It's in the shape of a mitten. So Greenville is in the middle of the state. Greenville had a large refrigerator factory. In fact, it was known as the refrigerator capital of the Midwest. They said it was the refrigerator capital of the world, but that was probably an exaggeration. Nonetheless, they had a really big refrigerator factory. And in that town of 8,000, 2,700 people worked at the refrigerator factory. The refrigerator factory was an Electrolux factory. It had started, you know, different refrigerator factories. It was acquired by Electrolux. Anyway, the point I'm talking about, it was an Electrolux factory. So it was my first year as governor, 2003. And I get a call from the head of our Michigan Economic Development Corporation who said, we got a big problem. This refrigerator factory in this town of 8,000 people is going to pull up and leave. And I said, well, let's just put what we have on the table to make sure that they stay. We'll make a good business case for them to stay here in Greenville. I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, they intend to go to Mexico where they can pay $1.57 an hour. And I said, okay, well, let's get everybody in a room. So we went to Greenville. Mayor was there, the city manager was there, the guy who was the president of the community college was there, the head of the United Auto Workers who represented the workforce was there. Everybody was in this big room in City Hall. And everybody basically, you know, shook out their pockets, put their chips in a big pile on the table, and slid it over to the management of Electrolux. And so we put on the table 20 years of zero taxes. We put on the table that we would help to build them a brand new factory. We put on the table huge amounts of labor concessions. In fact, the UAW at that point didn't want us to tell anybody how deep they were prepared to go because they wanted to save these jobs. We put free training, et cetera, on the table. We put it all. The Electrolux management took our package. They went out of the room to evaluate it. They were out of the room for 18 minutes. They came back in and they said, this is a really generous package. We have never seen the kind of offer that you've put on the table for us before, but there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to compensate for the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Mexico. So Greenville experienced this loss of 2,700 good-paying jobs. Now, the month that the last refrigerator came off the assembly line, the employees had a gathering, and they called it the Last Supper. And it was to sort of say goodbye. It was a bit of grieving. And I went to this gathering. It was at a community building called Clackle's Orchard Pavilion. And I went in, and there were round tables, and families were sitting around it. They had checkered tablecloths. They were eating out of box lunches. There was a band playing. And as I went in to the hall, a guy comes up to me, and he's got a ponytail, and he's got his two daughters with him. He's got tattoos on his arms, and he says, Governor, he says, I'm 48 years old. I've worked at this factory for 30 years. These are my two daughters. He said, my father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. I went from high school to factory, and this is all I know. And then he puts his hand on his chest, and he said, so, who is going to hire me? That question, who is going to hire me, has haunted me for 8 years as we've tried to restructure Michigan's economy in light of the fact that we have had 7 times more manufacturing jobs than any other state. When we see this inexorable pull of manufacturing to lower wage countries, what do we do as a nation to keep a middle class? What do we do for people like this guy and the thousands and thousands of others like him? So we pulled in all of the experts, the economic experts, the folks who know economic development as well as economists, and we said, what do we do as a state given how much concentration we have in manufacturing jobs in this global economy? How do we figure this out? And the experts said, you got to soar with your strengths and do a SWOT analysis. You know what a SWOT analysis is? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Do that on your entire economy, just like a business would do in its business portfolio. So we did that. Now, in the meantime, Greenville lays off these workers, the factory is demolished, they have this beautiful new factory that's in Mexico. And we said, we obviously can't focus on the traditional manufacturing jobs because we're not going to keep those. So we've got to focus on areas that we know we can be good in and that have opportunity in the United States. We picked 6 sectors, but one of those sectors is the one I want to talk about tonight, and that is energy. Y'all in California know this very well because you have been leaders in energy, and I want to give you an idea from the Michigan perspective of how important this opportunity is for us to create jobs here. First of all, the opportunity is huge. This is just a slide that shows the investment in energy that has been happening over the past 6 years. You can see the trajectory, a little bit of a dip in 2009 or a flattening out because of the recession, but the bottom line, huge amount of investment happening with this clean energy economy. I want to show you something that John Doerr says. Of course, he's a very big venture capitalist, and what happened to him? Try one more time. Louder.
Today, the internet economy is about $1 trillion and 1.2 billion people are on the internet. Well, the energy industry is even bigger. That's a $6 trillion worldwide economy with 4 billion users of electricity. I like to say that the new energy industry is the largest economic opportunity of the 21st century. It's the mother of all markets, and America needs to lead.
Okay. The mother of all markets. I love that because it really speaks of the opportunity that we might have, right? $6 trillion of investment expected to be made in this industry, 37 million jobs globally that are expected to be created in this sector. That's huge, huge. And the question is, where are those jobs going to be, right? And what do we need to do as a nation to be able to ensure that we get a piece of that pie? Now, here's the challenge for us, is that other countries are in it to win it. They all know this is a huge opportunity. And the challenge with manufacturing products, especially clean energy products, technology necessary, you cannot expect that the first investments are going to go from where they are invested first. In other words, governors try to get the investment of factories because they know it's going to be more difficult to move them. And that is likely to have the research and development teamed up with the actual manufacturing. You can't separate R&D with new products from the actual manufacturing. So we try to get the first investments, but so do other countries. And they're working at it big time. In fact, if you look at the top 10 countries of investment intensity, this is, means the amount that they are investing in their capital to make sure that they've got these jobs in the ground, factories, et cetera. Look, the US isn't even on the top 10 list. These other countries are developing policies to get this opportunity inside of their borders. This is a great quote that Hu Jintao, who's of course the president of China, said, Bush asks him, what keeps you up at night? And Bush was of course kept up at night by the threat of terrorism, and Hu Jintao said that what keeps him up at night is creating 25 million jobs a year. Okay, that's the kind of attitude we should be having, right? That's kept me up at night, but I don't have the resources of the federal government. We need federal policy to be able to create a level of jobs in our country, to recognize that our economic competitors are hungrier, or at least have acted hungrier, in a more hungry fashion than we have. China has developed a plan to invest $17 billion in fuel economy hybrids and electric cars by 2020. China manufactures 40% right now of the world's solar photovoltaic systems. And in fact, this is the California solar market. Now, so look at this. This is the last quarter of 2008. The blue at the bottom is the amount of the solar installations in California that were made in China. That's 8%. Japan had 32%, the US had 44%, and a few others. That was the fourth quarter of 2008. Look at what it was in the fourth quarter of 2010. China has 56% in 2 years. Japan has 15%. The United States' amount has dropped to 13%, and then the rest. Look at that. In 2 years, what are they doing that we're not doing? There are responses to this that the U.S. has got to adopt to get in the game to create those jobs here, because once those installations, once those factories happen, they are going to happen elsewhere and be imported to the U.S. rather than being made here. And that is a problem. And of course, this is a great example of how aggressive China has become. And this is not just China, but it's an example that I think is really important, because we got Evergreen Solar, who was in Massachusetts. We got them to put one factory in Michigan, but they're threatening to pull that up and go to China because the solar panel prices have plunged. They got huge government assistance from the Chinese government. They got low interest loans from the state-owned banks in China. And of course, there's low manufacturing costs. The reasons to leave, they said, was that there was no federal government assistance, no US challenge to subsidies on the Chinese side. There was a process for federal loans, but it was very costly. And what the CEO said is that the federal government, our government, has brought a knife to a gunfight. Its support is completely out of proportion to the support displayed by China and even to that of Europe. I'm just saying, we've got to get, we cannot, if we are going to be in this fight, we got to be in it. And we have to learn what other countries are doing to be able to win these investments. Korea is going to have a $20 billion commitment, or does, to building the advanced batteries for the electrification of the vehicle. Germany currently employs 300,000 people in the renewable energy sector. The goal is to get 47% of their power from renewable sources by 2020. And they anticipate that very soon more people will be working in the renewable energy sector than in their auto sector. Why? Because of policies. Policies matter. Let me give you an example. Can you hit the video on that?
The time is now. It's like right now. We are falling behind as a country. We're failing to solve some of the problems that it's our responsibility to solve. Energy as an industry has been broadly underinvested in for a generation. There will be more new wind turbine orders in Turkey this year than the United States. Look, I'm a free market capitalist, but advancing energy technologies really does have a government component. The good news is, this is imminently, having energy security, job creation, reduction of global warming is imminently solvable by innovations. Without those things, this country is not going to lead simply. This is all about doing. Everything about energy is really not about talking. It's really about doing.
course, you know, Jeff Immelt is now the president's, the head of the Council of Economic Advisors for the president, replaced, it wasn't, well, it was Larry, wasn't it? It was but he's head of the advisory group, right? It's a big job, and he's got the president's ear. He's heading a group called this American Energy Innovation Council as well, and that group of capitalists are saying that the United States must get in the game if we are going to be serious about getting these jobs here. So my point is that policy matters, and so I want to give you a quick story from the Michigan lab in the laboratory of the states. So in 2008, I had a split legislature, so I had to compromise a lot to be able to get some stuff through. And one of the things that we got through was a modest renewable energy standard, just 10% by 2015. But having put that in place and set the market signals, we actually were able to see a lot of good results. And so, you know, we got, for example, 10 companies to come, 4,965 jobs since the passage of that in 2008. Solar, 7 companies, 20,000 jobs, $3 billion invested since 2008. In batteries, because we had the renewable energy standard, but more importantly, the federal government, when President Obama was elected, had, as part of the stimulus, an investment in battery technology. Michigan teamed up with battery companies, and we pancaked state incentives on top of the federal ones. And as a result, Michigan got more than half of all of the federal battery grants for companies in Michigan. The expectation is that they're going to create 63,000 jobs, 17 companies, about $5 billion that has been committed to be invested, and that's just since August of 2009. The reason why I raise this is because policy does matter, and it's all about jobs. I just wanted to show you, I wish I had my cell phone with me. I would show I mean, some of you know this already, but for many people who haven't seen a lithium-ion car battery, it is huge. It's, of course, just the same technology as the battery in your cell phone. But this battery, because up to this point it had not been made prolifically in the US, it has to have companies doing all of this. So those battery cells, there's 200 of them. Inside of a battery cell, there's an anode, there's a cathode, there's separator, there's electrolyte. Every one of those steps requires a company to make them and people to be able to assemble them. So you assemble the cells, you make them in the US, you put them together into modules. That's another company that does that. They get assembled into a pack, and then the pack gets integrated into the vehicle. All of that is hugely job intensive. All of that, prior to this time, was largely made elsewhere. Before the Recovery Act, only 2% of the lithium-ion batteries for vehicles were made in the US, and now, because of that investment that the US government made, about 40% will be made in the United States. Very good. This slide just is a compilation of what policy has done in Michigan in 2 years. So you can see 47 companies, $9 billion invested, 89,000 jobs that are projected. Now, if you can do that in a little state like Michigan, think what the nation could do if we just sent the right signals. So what are the policies that we can get in this environment in Congress? Now, it's a whole new world because we have a much more conservative federal Congress. But the question is, can a case be made, a bipartisan case be made, that there are policies that both sides can agree on if it leads to job creation and business is on board? And so here are an example. I'll give you an example of the policies in just a second. Let's listen to Ursula Burns, Chairman and CEO of Xerox.
Made a nation by leading. Why wouldn't we take this thing? Not debate all of the sideline conversations, which are important, but the core of the energy discussion that I'm involved in is how does innovation, science, technology, engineering, and math, how does that help transform energy? I mean, we've transformed how we communicate. We've transformed how we pray. Everything we've transformed. Why would this be the one area that you would say, let's just do it the old way? I think it's the craziest conversation in the world. It's something that we need to go to.
something we need. Let's go to it. So here are 4 examples of policies that have gotten some bipartisan support. These are modest proposals, but these modest proposals, experts have said, could create 3 million jobs in America. So what are they? We want to push for the supply and the demand of electric and fuel-efficient cars. It should say 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure why I couldn't count there. But we need to create demand through a renewable energy standard and an energy efficiency resource standard, because energy efficiency obviously is a huge opportunity to create jobs too. We need to double the combined heat and power sites in the U.S. Do you guys know, for those of you who aren't necessarily following industrial policy, but combined heat and power and cogeneration all over Europe, but in the United States, not so much. Huge opportunity to create efficiencies in factories where you can take the heat, the excess heat, the waste heat, and recycle it essentially and convert it to energy in those factories. You just do that, and the industrial community loves this. You will significantly reduce the carbon footprint, but most importantly, you'll be creating jobs. And the 4th one is significantly increase the investment in research and development. So on the electric vehicle side, the expectations are from the experts that just increasing supply and demand for electric vehicles will create about 1.9 million jobs. And in addition to that, if you also push through technology that increases fuel economy standards to, say, 50 miles per gallon by the year 2020, then you'll create another 200,000 jobs. All good. What does it mean to expand supply and demand for those vehicles? It means, 1, on the demand side, you want to make sure that people want to buy these cars, and so ensuring that the cost of that battery, which by the way is pretty expensive, has been pretty expensive, but is coming down. It's the amount of the battery was about $35,000 per vehicle, and then it dropped, and they expect it'll be about $15,000 in another year or so, and it's going to be at par with an internal combustion engine, the predictions are, by about 2015. So you have to be able to create demand for this product by bringing down that initial cost, which is why when the Recovery Act said you get a credit of $7,500 every time you buy one of these cars, that helps obviously to create the demand. On the supply side, what they did with the Recovery Act in fostering the technology, commercializing that breakthrough technology in partnership with private actors, all of that helps to create both supply and demand. 200,000 jobs to be created if you just did an annual improvement in fuel efficiency. 4% would create 200,000 jobs. A federal renewable energy standard, 20% by 2025 would create 274,000 jobs. This is, according to the Renewable Energy Standard Alliance, I actually think that's a very conservative number because that's a nationwide standard. I think it's probably a lot higher than that. In fact, in California, the Union of Concerned Scientists, I believe, said that California's new renewable energy standard at 33% would create even more than that number there. So I think that that's a lowball number, but nonetheless, it's a respected source. These jobs that are created are all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people, but importantly, from at least my point of view, to have a manufacturing sector that is actually building these products in this country again is so critical. And if we decide that we're going to step back and have a hands-off approach to intervening in the economy to create this new sector, then we will continue to see these manufacturing jobs go. It just will happen. We will not have a manufacturing sector in this country, and therefore, the United States will be a fundamentally weak nation. If we don't make things in this country, then we will not be able to make the means for our own defense or our own energy independence. We cannot lose the manufacturing sector of this country, and that's why creating a market signal that we as a nation are serious about becoming energy independent has to be a step going forward. So manufacturing jobs, a huge piece of that. Construction and craft trades, 23% of the jobs created are in the construction area. Engineering and professional technical services, operation and maintenance, and of course administration and management. All kinds of jobs. If you create a federal energy efficiency resource standard, Just a modest 15% standard would create 200,000 jobs by 2020. This is from the White House. They have asked for this as part of their budget going forward to spur incentives to be able to do energy efficiency in industrial as well as utilities. And hopefully there's some bipartisan support for that. The combined heat and power will create 600,000 jobs if we double the number of sites in the United States. And research and development, I have this slide up here, and I'm sorry in the back because you probably can't see it that well, but this basically breaks down the federal government in terms of investment. And you can see that energy gets this very small amount. Research and development gets a very small amount when you compare, for example, with research and development on health, on of course, Medicare, income, security, defense, et cetera, take a huge amount. We just have this tiny little sliver on energy. And these other countries have a huge investment in energy research and development. And as I started to say earlier, you talk to anybody who is a manufacturer, they will tell you that you can't just go after the research and development jobs. If you want to keep the research and development jobs in America, you have to have manufacturing nearby. Because those scientists, those engineers, they've got to see the process. They have to have hands-on. Separating them will not work. The manufacturing will follow, and the scientists, the engineers will follow the manufacturing. So if we want to stop the loss and the brain drain of engineers and of scientists and of technology, then we have got to figure out the policy that keeps manufacturing in this country. Little Bill. Can you click it? Thanks.
A key element to get an energy breakthrough is more basic research, and that requires the government to take the lead. Only when that research is pointing towards a product, then we can expect the private sector to kick in. But we're missing the basic innovation that would get us this whole new way of making energy. By 2030, we'd be in a position to change the transportation infrastructure so that it's a zero carbon approach, and to change the electricity infrastructure so it's also a zero carbon approach. I think we need to do a better job taking the tough and interesting problems and mapping that back to the science you learn. You know, why learn physics, chemistry, material science? Well, the answer is that it will let you participate in these breakthroughs. And it should be fascinating. It should be drawing in about 10 times as many people as it is today. We need a lot of bright minds. This is fun work.
These 4 solutions are solutions that have been identified by a number of non-governmental organizations that they want to be able to push through Congress. And as you can see, the numbers on here gets you to 3.1 million jobs just through these pragmatic solutions. Now you notice I don't talk about cap and trade, I'm not talking about a carbon tax, because none of that is likely to happen in Congress, just to be frank and pragmatic about it. What can we get? What is doable? And that can be a significant base on which we can, as a nation, create more manufacturing jobs. Those 4 are doable and pragmatic solutions to be able to do it. I just want to take you back to Greenville for one moment. This whole discussion, or my whole yakking at you, really is about what is the role of government, right, in intervening in economies. And there's a lot of people, especially many in Washington, who strongly believe that America should just be hands-off, that we should just let the free market rule, and that, you know, you have creative destruction in a free market economy, but that's just the way it is. So we're not going to spend any money, certainly, to create any jobs here. If you have low enough taxes, they say, that will create the jobs. Now, the problem with that argument, of course, is that no matter how low the taxes are, I mean, in Greenville, we offered 0 taxes. They were in a Renaissance zone. They weren't paying anything. It still wasn't low enough to be able to keep those jobs in America, in Michigan. So the question is there a role for government to try to create the right supply and demand policies to keep jobs here and grow jobs here? Should we be looking at what our competitor nations are doing to try to put on the table the same kinds of policies? Because anybody who says that there's a free market out there in this global economy has not been watching what our economic competitors are doing. This is not a free market when they're putting sand in the engine to be able to steer jobs in their direction. So we're either in the game or we're not in the game. And if we're not in the game, we have forfeited. That's the bottom line. Back to Greenville for a moment. So it's not a totally sad story in Greenville. They've got a lot of challenges that they're still working on. But after Electrolux left, we decided that we were going to try to replace these lost jobs. And we were going to go after some of this new technology. So we went to a solar company called United Solar Ovonics, and we said, look, we'll train the people. The Montcalm Community College will free train anybody you want, any of these Electrolux workers. We can retrain. We will provide you with tax incentives. We will partner with you to make you successful. And as a result, there are 2 new solar factories in Greenville, which is great because though many of those Electrolux workers are working there, but not enough. It's not enough. Greenville, though, is sort of like the little engine that could. And I just wanted to show you, I'll share with you just for a moment, just this little funny clip from January of 2011, because Greenville has really taken on the solar realm by storm in the way that they can. Here's a little clip. I don't know if you can, yeah, one more, there you go.
It's generating through that snow. Greenville school leaders say their primary goal is educational.
We're giving Greenville high school students, and really K-12 students, a knowledge advantage in an emerging technology.
Danny Hansen and his classmates actually had the chance to play a part in the installation. The total cost for the Renewable Energy project for Greenville schools, $1 million. The district is paying for the project with grant funds and by selling the energy to Consumers Energy. The demand is driven at least in part by state requirements that utilities get some of their energy from renewable sources.
The combined system at the high school and at Lincoln Heights Elementary should bring in between $80,000 and $90,000 a year in revenues. Well, that more than pays for the bonds that bought the equipment. It's going to cover its costs, and there are so many side benefits, and we put people to work.
That's because the district is buying the panels from Unisolar, the Greenville company that moved into a community still reeling from the closure of Electrolux. The city of Greenville has solar arrays of its own at City Hall, at the airport, and now at the community center. Just like the panels at the schools, some city panels produce energy sold to Consumers Energy. Other panels generate electricity for city buildings, cutting the city's energy costs.
You notice what the temperature is on that? 18 degrees. I just love that, you know? They're out there putting solar panels in the middle of the snow. You know, they have to dust the snow off to allow the sun to get through. It's so excellent. So this community, I mean, they're determined, you know, to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So who are these 2 smiley guys? This is Pete Haynes, the one on the right, and George Bosonic is the one on the left. Pete Haynes is the superintendent of schools. He was the guy in the video who was explaining this. George Bosonic is the city manager of Greenville. And why are they smiling? They're smiling because Greenville has decided to live up to its name. And they are now calling it Green-erville. They put an ER in there because they are determined to be the first city in Michigan where all of the municipal buildings are off the grid. Very cool, right? Built by their people. And they're standing not in front of a house, but that's the airport. Isn't that great? So I'm just saying, if we get communities across this country to be examples like Greenville and like many communities in California are doing, I think we can send a message to Washington that we want jobs in this country. And clean energy jobs, I think, are the biggest opportunity going. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. Henry, I know we're going to have a few question and answers.
So I've got some questions here, and I'm going to start with them in addition, I think we didn't have enough cards, so if you have a piece of paper, you can use that to send a question up. And I see some people with their hands up, so please get those. But also, we have a mic out there, so if you really just don't have any paper and you didn't send a question already, then you can do it that way. So raise your hand and try to attract. Who's got the mic? Dana, are you? There, she's in the back. Okay, so Dana's in the back, but Dana, you got to come probably at least halfway up so people can see you. So, okay, well, great. As public policy dean, I have to push you a little bit further, I think, on the question of whether the government should be involved here. Okay, so the government should be involved in R&D. I'll give you that. But why in these other areas? What is it that the government should be doing? Should it be picking winners and losers? That's what...
I have to groan.
I watch the right-wing talk shows. I know how to make these arguments. So should we be picking winners and losers? Just let's get those tax rates down and everything will be great. So what is it government should do again?
The government needs to identify what's a critical national need, and it needs to co-invest in public-private partnerships with industry to be able to get these jobs to stay in the United States. Otherwise, they are going to go. So yes, the government's picking winners, if you will, but they're picking winners that make America strong. It's why the government picks the winner of creating a defense industry, because it makes America strong. It's why the government invested in NASA, in the internet, because it makes America strong. And the benefits, the ancillary benefits, the spin-off benefits from that obviously move out beyond just government need, helps the private sector as well. In energy, there is a critical national need, jobs, but as we're seeing across the world, we also have a critical national need to be energy independent as well.
Well, how about an intermediate approach, though? Something like standards that says you have to have a certain fraction of your energy come from green energy, or your automobiles have to meet certain standards and so forth. That's not quite picking winners and losers, but it's sort of setting up some kind of demand for these kinds of products.
Correct, and that's why both of those are on the list of things that we should be pushing Congress to do.
Is that better or worse, or how much? I guess I want to get a sense of the mix.
You have to go both. You have to have supply and demand. I mean, the government sending a market signal and setting standards obviously gives you a demand for those products, but you have to supply the technology and the finances to be able to allow those companies to meet that demand, especially for new technology where the upfront costs are more expensive until it's commercialized and taken to scale.
So let me just for a moment embroil you in California politics. You know Governor Brown has gotten rid of a lot of the local redevelopment efforts, or is trying to get rid of them. Those would be the places where this kind of investment would be made. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Yes, no.
I know. I hate to sound like a politician. I don't know what he's doing.
Okay.
But let me just say...
He's trying to cut the budget.
Well, he's trying to cut the budget, right. But so from my experience, the local units that have redevelopment arms, if they're effective, can be very great allies in being partners in recruiting businesses and making a strong economic case. At least we used them significantly in Michigan, especially since we didn't have it would be bottlenecked in Lansing, Michigan, if we didn't have those partners out on the ground. Now, I don't know if there are ways to enhance the accountability, the effectiveness of those agencies on the ground, if that's where he's going at. It's hard for me to second guess a fellow Democratic governor who's gone through tough budgets.
You made some of those decisions yourself.
Yeah,
I
brutal.
know from talking to my friends in Michigan. So, okay, let's go to some questions here. So one thing that's got to happen here is re-educating the workforce for new jobs. You indicated some of that's happening at community colleges, or even, in this case, a high school, it seemed like. So tell me more about that. What should we be doing?
I'm so glad whoever asked that. I feel like it's a plant. Seriously, because we did this great thing called No Worker Left Behind. And what we did was, because we had such a huge number of workers who were like that guy that I was telling you about, who had never been to college. And we in Michigan have a fairly low percentage of adults who have been to college because of our manufacturing history. People could go to from high school to factory and have a great middle class way of life. That was gone. So what we did in No Worker Left Behind is that we teamed up with all of the community colleges across the state, and we got the federal government to give us permission to be able to retool our workforce development dollars. So what we did is we said to all of those workers who were unemployed, you have 3 years to sign up. We will pay for you to be retrained or trained in the first instance at a community college in an area of need in our economy, and we'll pay for it, $5,000 per year, up to $10,000 per worker. We said, we cannot have you go back and get a degree in something that does not lead to a job. So there was a list of sectors that we would pay for people to be retrained in. We'd pay for them to go and get a healthcare job, or in, installation of wind turbines, or the things that we knew we were focused on. As a result of that, we saw a 35% increase in enrollment in community colleges. Of those who had gone through No Worker Left Behind, 81% had a job, got a job, or kept a job, or moved up the ladder in the area that they were trained in. It's 4 times the national rate. We said we would not pay for you to go back and get a degree in political science or French. Those are my, I could say it because those are my degrees, because we don't have use for you, but we do have use for people who have specific hands-on experience in some of these areas. So it's an example of a policy change that made a difference for individuals.
Okay, I think this is perhaps the most popular question in my quick survey of the various questions, and they all have this flavor. How can we be sure that if we create a renewable energy manufacturing sector, so we create new Electroluxes, that suddenly they don't come to us one day and say, gee, it was great getting started here, thanks for the subsidy, thanks for the R&D help, but guess what, we can get workers in Mexico for, what was it, $1.57 an hour? We're moving.
Yeah. So this is what, so you can't do it for everything, right? Because otherwise the bank runs dry. You have to decide as a nation what are important for our nation's needs. If you're going to give somebody a tax break, the quid pro quo is that you build it here and you create the jobs here. If you create clusters around renewable energy and you work with the universities, for example, you create what Singapore has done, which is called a golden triangle between the universities and the private sector and government to create an environment where they are successful globally. We need a market in this country. We have a need in this country. The market is here. So the catch is they have to agree, if they're going to take any of these, they have to agree to stay here and hire our people.
Is that the full answer? Is there no other thing that might keep them? Perhaps the R&D capability?
Well,
perhaps?
certainly, it's the same thing. It's true with R&D. It's true with the tax incentive up front, the asset financing that often could be a lure to keep somebody here. And it's also true with respect to having a renewable energy standard or some kind of market signal that the United States is going to be purchasing your product, or citizens in the United States are going to purchase your product.
And perhaps also having education that's really good so that we make sure we have workers that, although they're paid more, they're really actually more productive per hour or something like that?
Exactly right. Okay. And advanced manufacturing is, of course, different than your traditional repetitive motion manufacturing, which requires a level of skill that the older version of manufacturing did not require.
Okay, so one of the things you try to do with Electrolux is provide very, very low rates of taxes. Is that something that's going to happen in all of this? That as we go on, there's going to be more and more efforts to say, well, lower taxes, lower taxes? And how then do we provide the services to educate
If you ask
people?
any of these companies, they'll say the most important thing that the United States government can do is get a market signal so that I know my products are going to be purchased, and 2, provide me access to capital so I can buy the equipment that is necessary to produce these products. It's not so much the tax rate. It is much more about access to capital and getting a market, so supply and demand.
What other areas should we be thinking about investing in? You talked about energy, but how about trains and mass transit? And just could you name a bunch of areas?
Well, I do think that trains and mass transit would be a really important, critical national need, and we see that the Obama administration has supported that. I'm not sure how it's going to fly in Congress. In fact, I'm going to show you something really quickly on that. You know, we've got distributed generation of energy for those of you who follow this stuff. We want everybody to be acting because the continuing resolution that is being debated right now in Congress significantly cuts, particularly the research and development aspect that the Obama administration was asking for. To the extent that any of you want to take this great education that you have and put it to use, because what good is it unless you act upon, right? Unless you use it for action. I would invite you to take action by contacting whoever your member of Congress is. But I also would say that I think there's a sign-up sheet in the back. We're putting together a regular update for anybody who's interested in this clean energy economy. And if you sign up and want to put your email, I promise no spam, nothing like that. I'm not going to give it away, but I want to be able to send sort of action updates to those who are interested in helping get this through Congress.
Okay, also we've got unions which get, in some cases, high wages. You talked about how the UAW was willing to make concessions with respect to Electrolux, but as we know right now, there's a lot of strife going on in the Midwest with respect to at least one governor who suggests that perhaps...
More than one.
Pardon me?
More than one.
Well, more than one, yes. Ohio, Wisconsin, Indiana, at least, and Michigan to some extent. What should we be doing about collective bargaining? How do you feel about what's going on in Wisconsin? Are strong unions important to create the kinds of results you want, or are they an impediment?
Okay, so now you've got public sector and private sector, right? So let me just take them quickly. Private sector, just in automotive manufacturing, labor costs are 7% of the vehicle. The labor costs are not an overwhelming amount of the issue. The UAW, as one example, the new president of the UAW is a fellow named Bob King. He has taken it upon himself to ensure that the UAW is a partner with management in quality of the vehicle. In fact, he's obsessed with quality. And what he is saying to the Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler is, if you want to have a quality car, you have to use our people because we have the level of expertise and we're going to invest in their training. This is the new frame on the private sector side that the unions are taking, is that we are going to be partners in making you globally competitive, that we are the advantage and not the disadvantage, that the old way was management versus labor, but the new way is us against the world. So that's number one on the private sector. The private sector has taken on a lot of reforms with respect to their own pensions and benefits, wages, tiered wages, et cetera. The public sector is learning from the private sector. I firmly believe that this effort in Wisconsin is not an effort to balance the budget, is an effort to quash the union. The union has said that they would give the concessions that the governor is asking for. I say this as governor of the state that has cut more out of state government as a percentage than any state in the nation. We have cut every single year that I was governor. And for us, I've cut things that other governors have barely begun to scratch the surface on. For example, our new state employees pay 20% of their health care benefits. Our new employees don't even have a pension. They are on a 401k. We've gone through all of this. The older employees vested, we kept them in, but the new folks who didn't expect that they were going to be on that system have a different system. We learned that from what the private sector has done to become competitive. These are not easy things, but I negotiated these at the bargaining table. And it was difficult. These were tough negotiations, but I always respected the fact that there was a representative of the folks who are doing the work in the state to get to serve citizens. The last thing you want to do as a CEO is to tick off all of the people who work for you by trashing them. So both on the teacher side as well as on the public employee side, you can get a lot more with honey than vinegar. And even if it's hard to negotiate, I think what he's doing, and I said this the other night, is the lazy way of achieving those savings, because it just means that he doesn't have to go back every year and try it again. He gets to do it by fiat one time because he's got a legislature of his own party, and it's really not about the budget balancing.
But why do we positively need unions? I mean, obviously workers will say that it helps wages and it maybe helps working conditions, but from the perspective of a governor, from the perspective of an employer, is there an argument to be made that unions are worthwhile from their perspective? I think you were hinting at that, but say a little more.
Straight out, I would say that that is true. I mean, if you talk to the CEOs, especially the new CEOs of the auto industry, for example, they will tell you that you go onto a floor of the factory, if you walked onto any of their factory floors, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between management and labor. There is an effort to work as teams. Often, and I can say this as a governor and as the attorney general and as the head of a law department in a county, and every single step of management that I have had to negotiate with unions. It's often easier to deal with one representative who speaks for the group than have to deal individually. And they can help to move out the bad employees, they understand it, or they can battle for the rights of the whole. But it's, I think, a complete misnomer to assume that unions are bad for business or that unions are bad for the public sector, because they really do help to raise the, it doesn't just raise the benefits of those who are working in those places, but it raises the benefits sort of by extension of everyone else. Without the unions, obviously earlier in the last century, we would not be seeing the minimum wage, we wouldn't be seeing the 40-hour work week, et cetera. That's long ago. Today, these unions are going to be brokers of great skill, and that's where their value added comes in the 21st century.
So did you see unions helping you with some of your agenda as governor of Michigan?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, you know, one of the things at the bargaining table the unions brought was that my predecessor had done a lot of no-bid contracts, and the contracts themselves were wasteful. And so the unions came to the table and identified all of the contracts where they could do the work either cheaper or where we should put them out for rebidding. And in fact, it saved over $1.1 billion because of the partnership that I had with the unions in making sure that savings were identified.
So this may be a bit more speculative, but I have two questions here which are related, and they ask about, one says, so just so you'll know you're in Berkeley, it says, continuing to invest in cars is going to result in more carnage on the roads in the United States, as well as making something that's only affordable to the well-off. So we should invest in trains. So this questionnaire says. The other one says, how can we force a change in the U.S. from a consumption-based economy to a production economy? I think underneath these questions is a question about, do we have the wrong values? Is it wrong to constantly say you should really spend your money on a great big new SUV instead of relying upon public transportation and having an economy that's more sustainable in some way?
Well, I just think we have to be better about providing options for people. I mean, if we don't have a viable mass transit system in the United States, people don't have that option. And so they feel squeezed because they feel that their choices are that you spend $20,000 on a vehicle or more, depending on the size. So I think you have to have better options, and I think the options, especially on the vehicle side, have to be more fuel efficient.
Let's turn a little bit to your work as governor. Well, actually, let's ask a question about UC Berkeley first. Someone asks here, what can UC Berkeley do to help make sure that we have enough scientists, technologists, mathematicians, people in what are called the STEM areas, so that we can actually compete in these areas? What should we be doing as a university, or more generally, what should higher education in California be doing?
Well, I mean, I'm curious about this, because Berkeley has always had such a phenomenal reputation for churning out people who are scientists and engineers, et cetera, mathematicians. I guess the real question is how do you make the pipeline bigger, right? Because you all are doing a great job, I would think, unless, Dean Brady, you think there's probably more that any of us can do. But in terms of the pipeline, I'm a big believer in national standards in terms of education. I think that we should call upon all of our states to adopt high-level standards for science, technology, engineering, math, et cetera. And I can just tell you it's a huge battle. I think California adopted the high standards a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But I can just tell you in Michigan, when we did it, it was brutal because every local school district kept saying, it's local control. We know what's best for our kids. And not all kids are ready for college. Not all kids are going to go to college. Not all kids can do Algebra 2. And that was the argument that we kept getting back from the local school districts. But the reality is that in this global economy, we cannot accept mediocrity. Those kids who weren't going to go to college are going to be left with just such diminished chances. So, And even in a state like Michigan, which has seen the loss of so many jobs, Dan and I were looking at cottages on a lake the other day, and the realtor who was taking us around, her husband was the superintendent of the school district, very rural district. And so I said to her, so, you know, how's he finding the new standards? You know, are the kids meeting the standards? Are they going to go to college? And she says, oh, no, they're not going to even go to college. And I said, what? What do you mean they're not even going to go to college? She said, oh, they still keep thinking that the jobs are coming back, that the manufacturing jobs are going to come back. And this is in a state that has seen this inexorable movement away. So I'm just saying that I think that we've got to raise these standards for every district and tell every single child that there's not even an option anymore if we're going to even come close to catching places like Korea and Norway and Canada who churn out a much bigger number, not just of STEM graduates, but of graduates overall.
Let's return to the jobs issue. Here's someone who suggests that we should impose tariff barriers as a way to protect U.S. industry to make sure that we can get these young industries to move forward. Good idea? Bad idea?
I think that is problematic. And but believe me, I think we should be fighting like tigers at the World Trade Organization to prevent other countries from putting up barriers to our products. So I believe that we ought to be tearing down the barriers over there, and that we ought to be incenting the production over here. But if you start to put up barriers here, they're going to put up more barriers. You end up in this war that continues. But there are a lot of very unfair practices that other countries are engaged in that up to this point, the United States has had sort of a pussycat at the World Trade Organization rather than a tiger. And we need much more aggressive enforcement. And by the way, we cannot be adopting any more trade agreements that give the store away. We have to adopt trade agreements that are fair. And when I say fair, I'm talking about measurable, that we are saying we're going to only trade with you, trading partner, if you have the same rules as we do, whether it's on the environment or work rules or whatever. We've got to have a level playing field. And that paradigm has not, I mean, it's in the process. I think President Obama has put forth a new trade agreement, for example, with Korea that was much better than the one that was previously negotiated under the Bush administration. There's another one in Colombia that is teeing up, but that adopting a trade agreement that's fair, enforcing it, and going to bat for our companies is critical.
This is more sort of an inside baseball, but it's an interesting question, it seems to me, which is you had to work with a Republican legislature, at least part of it was Republican in Michigan. What kinds of proposals did they have for increasing jobs in Michigan? Did they have proposals? And what were they?
Yeah, it was the same as what you're seeing on the national level, cut taxes and cut government. Now, so if it were true that cutting taxes and cutting government were the prescription, Michigan would be the most robust economy in the nation. I'm telling you, in my first term, I bought into all that. I cut taxes 99 times, all these different types of taxes that they sent to me.
But did you ever increase them just once?
I did increase them once.
Yeah, see that?
but in the first term I didn't.
Okay.
And I just cut. And you know, as I said, I cut more out of government than any governor in the country. Certainly any governor in Michigan history. I closed down 13 prisons, cut a quarter of the state departments. We don't even have a state fair anymore. So I cut everything that could move. I'm serious. And did it work? No, it didn't work because something else was going on. And those who are relying on the old economic models are going to keep us in this position of losing jobs globally. We got to realize that the old theories, the 20th century theories, they may have worked in the 20th century, but we're in a global economy. The playing field is much broader than just the geography of California or Michigan. It's much bigger. So we have to have a different economic model in order for us to keep jobs in America.
You were in study abroad. You went to France.
Loved it.
Okay. Well, so here's the question. We're in iHouse here, so this is a good question. So tell us how that year abroad helped you become a better attorney general, better governor. What did you learn about other countries that was helpful?
You know, there's a great song. Is it Leanne Rimes who said, "I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean." And that's sort of what the international experience gives you, is a huge amount of humility. realizing that you are just this little speck on this very broad planet. But isn't that great? Because you are a speck in this big, broad planet, and sometimes little specks can get a whole lot done. It gave me a huge appreciation for other people and for the diverseness of our world. And my great study abroad leaders are over here. They came to see me tonight. They're retired and everything, but they came over because they know I loved the experience so much. And I tell my kids all the time, you have got to go overseas. You've got to realize that this is not just the only universe, that the universe is so broad. So I hope you all, if you haven't gone, you're here in the International, was it this called? I wanted to say the IHOP.
International House.
Yes.
International House. There's a bunch of them around the world that were funded by Rockefeller, actually, interestingly enough. There's one in Paris, in fact. Isn't that right? Yes? I think near the Sorbonne or something. Okay, give us an anecdote, though. Tell us one particular thing that you learned when you were abroad, that you that's an aha thing that you've remembered and that...
Our motto was, what goes on in France stays in France, so...
Should I press her on this question? Okay, we won't do that.
I'll just say I did live in Bordeaux.
Okay. And good wine.
Very good wine.
Good Bordeaux, I hope. Okay. You're back in academia for a while here. Is that partly because you felt like there was just a lot to learn about what the agenda would be for the future in terms of trying to solve some of the problems you faced in Michigan? Tell us a little bit about perhaps getting to a point where you realize, gosh, I need to know more if I'm going to really progress further in what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience is very hands-on, right? And it's, I love the metaphor of the laboratory of the states because we really did experiment with a lot of stuff to see what works and what doesn't. And I was saying to somebody earlier that the Gallup organization 2 days ago did an assessment of all of the states in the country, and Michigan was the #1 state in this past year for job growth in terms of improvement, which is great. We finally cracked the code, we finally figured out what it was that was going to work, and it was a partnership with government. Obviously, the U.S. government's partnership with the auto industry to save it from complete collapse was a big piece of that. So my experience has been very, empirical and hands-on, and Dan and I, we are writing a book about this hands-on experiment in our Michigan laboratory, but I also know that there are such phenomenal colleagues here and students here who we can learn from, and so we're excited to do that. I don't know if Robert Reich is here, but I just picked up his book, Aftershock, and I'm all about it. So I'm excited to learn.
This is a really big question, but there's so many more people that are peopling the earth. There's so many jobs that have to be created. How optimistic are you about the future? Can we solve the problems that we face, or are we just facing a problem of environmental degradation, too many people, too few jobs, can't be done?
No, we can absolutely do it. Just look at the best practices across the globe. If you look at a country like Sweden, they don't have a single landfill in Sweden, because they do this combined heat and power and you reuse all of their waste. And they've got 400,000 people who are working in this clean energy economy. They have the right policies in place that create jobs and help the planet. So I am very bullish on the future if we get the right policy in place. However, if we continue to go, if we listen to some who would want to return us to the 20th century economic theories that have brought us to this problem, then I worry that we are no longer going to lead, but we're also going to be the victims of the globe and continue to see our jobs go.
Well, what's the root of why we have folks who have, in your opinion, policies that just simply won't solve the problem? This questioner wants to know, how can policymakers who receive huge contributions from smokestack and carbon-based energy industries be persuaded to support clean energy? Is it really even possible, or is money just so overwhelmed politics now that you're going to get what the folks with the money want?
There is no doubt that money has a huge, huge influence. But this is why you, Goldman School of Public Policy students, I exhort you to raise your hand and run. Because we need people who are not tainted and polluted by lobbyist money, who have the best interests of their community or their nation at heart. We need people who will stand up and do the right thing. And if you don't, then we will get what we've got. I hope we can get a change of this Citizens United case, which allows for corporations to be considered as people for donating to political parties. It's totally ridiculous. It furthers the corruption of the political system. We got a lot of work to do, though.
So that's a great note to end on. Let me just ask Dan Mulhern to stand up and wave to the crowd since he's here, and we want to welcome him to Berkeley because he's going to be teaching in the business school mostly, but also I hope we'll get him over to the public policy school. So in fact, Governor Granholm and Dan are both going to be in the law school, the business school, and of course the Goldman School of Public Policy. We feel blessed to have them here. Thanks for coming. Welcome home.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.